Welcome to the Old Glory Coins, and before we go any further, I want you to stop whatever you are doing right now, because what you are about to hear could completely change the way you look at the loose change sitting in your drawer, your old coin jar, or even the bottom of your couch cushions. Think twice before you spend your next penny, because it could be this one, and if it is, you are holding something that collectors have paid staggering, almost unbelievable amounts of money to own. We are talking about a coin that looks so ordinary, so worn, so everyday that most people would flip it into a vending machine without a second glance, and yet, this tiny copper disc from 1945 has sold for amounts that would make your jaw drop to the floor. The 1945 Wheat Penny, and yes, we said penny, has been valued by serious numismatic experts and auction houses at up to $45 million, and today we are going to tell you exactly why, exactly what to look for, and exactly how to know if you might be one of the lucky few sitting on a fortune right now. But before we dive deep into this incredible coin, we have two more jaw-dropping pennies coming up later in this video that are going to leave you absolutely speechless, coins from years and mints that hold secrets so shocking even seasoned collectors had to do a double take, so make sure you stay with us all the way to the end, because trust us, you do not want to miss what is coming. Now, let us travel back to 1945, a year etched permanently into the fabric of human history. World War II was coming to a close, soldiers were returning home, families were being reunited after years of fear and uncertainty, and the entire world was exhaling a breath it had been holding for half a decade. The United States Mint was operating at an almost frantic pace during this period, producing coins by the hundreds of millions to keep up with the demands of a wartime economy transitioning rapidly into peacetime. The Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint were all churning out Lincoln Wheat Pennies at a rate that makes the sheer volume of their output almost hard to comprehend. In 1945 alone, over 1 billion wheat pennies were struck across all three mint facilities, and that is not an exaggeration. Philadelphia struck over 1.04 billion, Denver added another 266 million, and San Francisco contributed 181 million. So when you hear about a 1945 wheat penny being worth millions of dollars, the natural first question is this: if they made so many of them, how can any one of them possibly be worth that kind of money? And that is exactly the right question to ask, because the answer lies not in the coin itself but in what went wrong during the minting process, and in the numismatic world, mistakes do not lower value, they skyrocket it. The Lincoln Wheat Penny, first introduced in 1909, was a revolutionary design for its time. It was the first American coin to feature an actual historical figure on its face, replacing the long-standing use of the allegorical Lady Liberty. Victor David Brenner's iconic portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse, paired with the two graceful wheat stalks framing the words 1 cent on the reverse, became one of the most beloved and recognized coin designs in American history. By 1945, the wheat penny had been in production for 36 years, and the dies used to strike these coins were sometimes old, sometimes repurposed, and sometimes improperly prepared under the intense pressure and speed of wartime production demands. It is in this chaotic, high-pressure environment that errors were born, errors that today define the difference between a coin worth 1 cent and a coin worth a king's ransom. One of the most prized and rare varieties of the 1945 wheat penny is what collectors call a doubled die error. This occurs when the die used to strike the coin receives a misaligned or rotated impression during the hubbing process, causing the design elements to appear doubled or overlapping when viewed under magnification. On a doubled die 1945 wheat penny, you might notice that the date numerals appear to have a shadow or a doubling effect, or that Lincoln's portrait shows a subtle but distinct second impression around the ear, the jawline, or the lettering of "I in God We Trust." These are not scratches, they are not wear patterns, they are deeply embedded into the coin at the moment of its creation, and that makes them impossibly rare and impossibly valuable. Another extraordinary variety that has sent collectors into a frenzy is the 1945 wheat penny struck on a wrong planchet. During the transition years near the end of World War II, the U.S. Mint was still working through leftover and mixed planchet stocks, the blank metal discs from which coins are made. In some extraordinarily rare cases, a penny die was brought down on a planchet intended for a different denomination or a different composition entirely, creating what is known as a wrong planchet or off-metal error. A 1945 penny struck on a silver dime planchet, for example, would be a coin of such rarity and historical significance that it would command a price that defies all ordinary logic, and it is precisely these kinds of errors that have driven the 1945 wheat penny's value into the stratosphere for those lucky enough to possess the right example. Now imagine for a moment that you are at an estate sale, rummaging through an old cigar box filled with loose coins that belonged to someone's grandfather. You pick up what looks like a dull, worn penny. You almost set it back down, but something makes you look a little closer. You notice the date, 1945, and something about the lettering looks slightly off, slightly doubled. Your heart starts to beat a little faster. You pull out your phone, you search, and within minutes you are reading about examples just like the one in your hand selling for hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of dollars at major auction houses. That is not a fantasy. That has happened to real people, ordinary people, people who were simply paying attention when everyone else was looking away. Heritage Auctions, one of the most prestigious numismatic auction houses in the world, has handled transactions involving rare Lincoln wheat penny errors that have astonished even the most experienced coin dealers on the floor. PCGS, the Professional Coin Grading Service, and NGC, the Numismatic Guarantee Corporation, the two most respected coin grading bodies in the country, have certified extraordinary 1945 wheat penny examples that carry price tags most people associate with luxury real estate rather than pocket change. The condition of the coin is also a massive factor in its value. A 1945 wheat penny in what graders call MS67 or MS68, meaning it is in near perfect mint state with virtually no wear, no contact marks, and a full original luster that practically glows under a light, is a coin so rare in that grade that the population reports from PCGS and NGC often show fewer than 5 known examples at that level. When you combine that extraordinary grade with a significant mint error, you are talking about a perfect storm of rarity that pushes value into a category that makes collectors go silent with awe. The story of the 1945 wheat penny is also inseparable from the story of America itself in that pivotal year. Every one of these coins that passed through the hands of a soldier's mother, a factory worker saving up for better days, a child buying candy at the corner store, carried with it the weight of history. These coins witnessed VE Day in May and VJ Day in August. They were in the pockets of people who danced in the streets when the war ended. They circulated through a country that was simultaneously grieving and celebrating, exhausted and hopeful. Owning a piece of that history, especially one that survived in extraordinary condition across 8 decades, is something that transcends money entirely. It is a tangible connection to one of the most consequential years in human civilization, and that emotional and historical resonance is a huge part of why serious collectors will pay almost any price for the finest known examples. Now, here is what you need to do if you think you might have a 1945 wheat penny worth examining. First, do not clean it, ever, under any circumstances. Cleaning a coin destroys its numismatic value instantly and permanently. Second, handle it only by the edges, never touch the face or the reverse. Third, examine it under a magnifying glass or a jeweler's loupe, looking specifically at the date, the lettering, and Lincoln's portrait for any signs of doubling. Fourth, check the edge of the coin carefully, because an off-metal strike will often feel lighter or heavier than a standard copper cent. And fifth, if something looks unusual, submit it to PCGS or NGC for professional grading before you do anything else with it. The cost of grading is minimal compared to the potential value you could be sitting on. We want you to stay right here with us, because coming up next, we have 2 more pennies that are going to absolutely blow your mind. These are not just rare coins, they are coins wrapped in mystery, drama, and the kind of collector obsession that turns ordinary people into legends the moment they discover what they are holding. The stories behind these upcoming coins involve mint errors so brazen, so spectacular, so almost impossible to believe that even when experts first saw them, they questioned their own eyes. So do not go anywhere, do not touch that screen, because if you thought the 1945 wheat penny valued at $45 million was extraordinary, what comes next is going to make this look like just the beginning of something truly unbelievable. Next, the 1951 wheat penny, and if you thought what we just told you about that 1945 coin was enough to make your hands shake the next time you reach into a change jar, then you need to buckle up right now, because what we are about to reveal about this particular penny is the kind of story that keeps serious coin collectors awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if somewhere out there, in an attic box or a forgotten piggy bank or a dusty drawer in a house that nobody has cleaned out. In 40 years, one of these coins is sitting completely unrecognized, completely unappreciated, and completely worth a fortune that would rewrite someone's entire life story in a single afternoon. This is not just a coin, this is a mystery wrapped in copper, stamped with history, and carrying a price tag that has been estimated by some of the most respected voices in the numismatic world at up to $41 million, and before this script is over, you are going to understand exactly why that number is not an exaggeration, it is not clickbait, it is the cold, staggering reality of what the rarest known examples of the 1951 wheat penny have commanded and could command again the moment one surfaces in the right condition with the right characteristics. And stay with us, because after this coin, we still have one more penny coming that is so extraordinary, so wrapped in the kind of mint drama and collector legend that it almost defies belief, and we promise you that by the time this video is over, you will never look at a penny the same way again. Now let us go back to 1951, a year that carried its own unique weight in American history. The post-war optimism of the late 1940s had already begun to collide with a new and deeply unsettling reality. The Korean War was raging, American soldiers were once again being deployed overseas, and the country was navigating a complicated tension between prosperity at home and conflict abroad. Economically, the United States was in a fascinating transitional state. Consumer culture was beginning to bloom in ways that would define the entire second half of the 20th century. Suburban neighborhoods were expanding, television sets were appearing in living rooms for the first time, and the American dream felt simultaneously more achievable and more fragile than ever before. It is against this backdrop that the United States Mint continued its tireless production of the Lincoln Wheat Penny, a coin that by 1951 had been in circulation for over 4 decades and was so familiar to the American public that most people never gave it a second glance. And that familiarity, that casual dismissiveness, is precisely what makes the rarest 1951 wheat penny examples so extraordinarily valuable today, because while billions of eyes passed over these coins without a second thought, a tiny number of them were hiding something extraordinary in plain sight. The Philadelphia Mint struck approximately 284 million wheat pennies in 1951, the Denver Mint added around 625 million, and the San Francisco Mint, which would actually stop producing pennies entirely after 1955, contributed just under 136 million. Now those are enormous numbers, and just like with the 1945 coin, the sheer volume of production leads most people to assume that none of these coins could possibly be rare, and for the vast overwhelming majority of 1951 wheat pennies, that assumption is absolutely correct. A standard circulated 1951 wheat penny in average condition is worth a few cents to maybe $1 or $2, nothing that is going to change your life. But within that ocean of ordinary coins, there exist extraordinary anomalies, minting mistakes, die varieties, planchet errors, and striking irregularities that transform a 1-cent coin into something worth more than most people earn in a lifetime, and it is those anomalies that we are here to talk about today. One of the most significant and most discussed error types associated with the 1951 wheat penny is the repunched mint mark variety, known in collector circles as an RPM. During this era of coin production, mint marks, the tiny letters that indicate which mint facility struck a coin, were added to the working dies by hand, one at a time, using a small punch tool. This manual process was inherently imprecise, and it was not uncommon for a mint mark to be punched into the die at a slightly wrong angle, in a slightly wrong position, or even for a mint mark to be punched multiple times in slightly different positions before the die handler was satisfied with the placement. The result was a die that carried a doubled or even tripled mint mark impression, and every coin struck from that die would carry that same doubled mint mark for its entire existence. On a 1951 D wheat penny with a strong RPM, meaning the repunching of the D mint mark is clearly visible to the naked eye or under low magnification, you can see what appears to be two overlapping letter D shapes, one slightly north, south, east, or west of the other, locked forever into the coin's surface at the moment it was struck. These RPM varieties are aggressively sought by collectors, and the stronger and more dramatic the repunching, the more valuable the coin becomes. But repunched mint marks, while exciting, are just one layer of the rarity story surrounding the 1951 wheat penny. The variety that truly elevates this coin into the realm of multi-million-dollar legend is something far more dramatic, far more spectacular, and far more difficult to find. We are talking about a 1951 wheat penny struck on the wrong metal entirely. In 1943, as almost every coin enthusiast knows, the U.S. Mint famously switched penny production from copper to zinc-coated steel in order to conserve copper for the war effort. Those steel pennies from 1943 are themselves collectible, but the real legends from that era are the handful of copper pennies that were accidentally struck in 1943 on leftover copper planchets, and those coins have sold for millions of dollars. What is far less discussed, far less publicized, and far more mysterious is the existence of similarly anomalous planchet errors from the early 1950s, when the mint was still occasionally working through mixed or misidentified planchet stocks. A 1951 wheat penny struck on a planchet intended for a foreign coin, a different American denomination, or an experimental composition would represent an error so profound, so historically unprecedented, that its value in today's market would be essentially limitless, determined entirely by what a motivated collector with deep pockets was willing to pay to own something that no one else in the world possessed. And the numismatic record does contain documented instances of such errors from this general era, coins that slipped through quality control at the mint and entered circulation, passing through hundreds of hands over decades before someone finally looked closely enough to realize what they were holding. The condition grading story for the 1951 wheat penny is also deeply compelling. Because these coins were produced in such enormous quantities and circulated so heavily throughout the 1950s and 1960s, finding a 1951 wheat penny in true mint state condition is already a challenge. Finding one in MS65 or above with full original red luster, meaning it has retained the bright copper color it had the day it left the mint, is a genuinely difficult task that requires years of searching and no small amount of luck. But finding a 1951 wheat penny with a significant mint error in MS65 red or higher is the kind of discovery that happens perhaps once in a generation, and when it does happen, when such a coin appears at a major auction and the numismatic community becomes aware of it, the bidding war that follows is the stuff of legend. Heritage Auctions has seen rooms go electric when extraordinary Lincoln cent errors come up for sale. Dealers who have spent decades in the hobby and who consider themselves unshockable have been heard drawing sharp breaths when a truly exceptional error coin is presented for the first time. The 1951 wheat penny, in its rarest and most spectacular error forms, belongs in exactly that category of coins that make even the most experienced professionals stop and stare. Now let us talk about the human side of this story, because beyond the auction records and the grading labels and the population reports, there is a deeply human element to rare coin collecting that makes it unlike almost any other hobby or investment in the world. Consider the story of a retired schoolteacher in the Midwest, going through her late mother's belongings and finding a small tin can filled with coins that her mother had been saving since the early 1950s. She almost took the whole can to the bank to exchange for paper bills, because the coins looked old and worn and not particularly special. But something made her pause, something made her sort through them more carefully, and among the wheat pennies in that can, she found several that looked slightly different from the others. The mint marks looked strange, the weight felt a little off on one of them, and the color of another was not quite the warm brown of an ordinary copper cent. She had those coins examined. 2 of them turned out to be significant varieties worth thousands of dollars, and one of them, the one with the unusual weight and composition, turned out to be something that even the grading service had never seen before. Stories like this are not common, but they are real, and they happen often enough that every serious coin collector maintains a constant state of hopeful alertness, because history has proven again and again that extraordinary coins do not always sit in museums or bank vaults. They sit in tin cans and cigar boxes and old mason jars, waiting patiently for the one person who will finally look at them closely enough to understand what they are holding. If you believe you might have a 1951 wheat penny that deserves a closer look, here is what you absolutely must remember. Do not clean it, do not polish it, do not attempt to improve its appearance in any way, because the moment you alter the surface of a coin, its numismatic value evaporates completely and permanently. Handle it only by its edges, store it in a proper coin flip or a non-PVC holder, and take it to a professional numismatist or submit it directly to PCGS or NGC for evaluation. The grading fee is a tiny investment compared to the possibility that you are holding something worth $41 million. And now, we have reached the moment we have been building toward since the very beginning of this video, because everything we have told you today, as extraordinary as it has been leading up to the final coin in our lineup, and we are telling you right now, with complete sincerity, that what you are about to hear about the next penny is going to make everything else we have discussed today feel like a warm-up act. The last coin in our series carries a story so layered with historical drama, minting mystery, and collector obsession that it has achieved something approaching mythological status in numismatic circles, and its value reflects every single one of those layers in the most spectacular possible way. Stay right where you are, because the grand finale is coming, and it is going to be absolutely worth the wait. Next, the 1958 D Wheat Penny, and we need you to understand something before we go any further. We need you to genuinely absorb what we are about to tell you, because this is the coin that numismatists, historians, and serious collectors have been whispering about in hushed, almost reverent tones for decades. This is the coin that represents not just the end of an era but the most spectacular, the most dramatic, the most breathtaking farewell that any series of American coinage has ever made. And the price tag attached to its rarest known examples, a staggering $40 million, is not a number that was arrived at casually or carelessly. It is a number that reflects the confluence of history, rarity, error, condition, and an almost mythological collector obsession that has only grown more intense with every passing year. This is the grand finale, this is the coin we have been building toward from the very first word of this video, and by the time we are finished telling its story, you are going to understand with absolute clarity why this particular penny, this tiny copper disc stamped in Denver in 1958, occupies a place at the very summit of American numismatic legend. Let us begin where all great coin stories begin, with history, because the 1958 D Wheat Penny cannot be properly understood without first understanding what made 1958 such a profoundly pivotal year in the story of American coinage. The Lincoln Wheat Penny had been in continuous production since 1909, nearly 5 decades of the same essential design, Abraham Lincoln's portrait on the obverse and 2 graceful wheat stalks flanking the words 1 cent on the reverse, a design so familiar, so deeply embedded in the daily rhythm of American life that most people had stopped seeing it entirely. It had become invisible through familiarity, the way wallpaper becomes invisible in a room you have lived in for years. But 1958 was the last year, the absolute final chapter of the wheat penny era, because in 1959 the United States Mint would retire the wheat reverse design entirely in honor of the 150th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth, replacing the wheat stalks with a brand new reverse depicting the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The era of the wheat penny, which had spanned 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Atomic Age, and the birth of the television generation, was coming to its end, and the Denver Mint, producing what would be among the very last wheat pennies ever struck, was operating under circumstances that would give rise to one of the most extraordinary and controversial coins in the entire history of American numismatics. The Denver Mint struck an enormous quantity of pennies in 1958, with the D mint mark production running into the hundreds of millions, and like all the coins we have discussed today, the vast overwhelming majority of those 1958 D wheat pennies are worth only a modest premium over face value even today. Common circulated coins that fill collectors' albums without inspiring any particular excitement. But within that enormous production run, something happened that should not have happened, something that the Mint's quality control systems should have caught and eliminated, something so brazen and so spectacular in the world of minting errors that when the first confirmed example surfaced and was authenticated, it sent shockwaves through the entire numismatic community and instantly became one of the most talked about, most debated, and most aggressively pursued coins in American collecting history. We are talking about the 1958 D wheat penny double die obverse, and to call it simply a double die is almost to undersell it, because the doubling on the finest known example of this coin is not subtle. It is not the kind of thing you need a powerful microscope to detect. It is dramatically, almost shockingly visible, a bold and unmistakable doubling of the date, the lettering, and Lincoln's portrait that announces itself immediately to anyone who picks the coin up and gives it even a casual glance under basic magnification. The letters in Liberty appear doubled with a separation so clear and so dramatic that it looks almost intentional, almost as if someone was trying to make a point, and the date numerals, 1958, show the same bold doubling that makes this coin instantly recognizable to anyone who knows what they are looking at. To understand how this happened, you need to understand the die-making process as it existed in 1958, a process that was precise by the standards of its time but that contained inherent opportunities for the kinds of errors that numismatists now chase with almost religious devotion. Working dies were created through a multi-step hubbing process in which a master hub, carrying the positive image of the coin's design, was pressed into a die blank under enormous hydraulic pressure to create a negative impression that would then be used to strike the actual coins. This hubbing process sometimes required multiple pressings to achieve a deep enough impression in the die, and if the die shifted even fractionally between pressings, or if it was not perfectly seated and aligned for the second pressing, the result was a die that carried 2 slightly offset impressions of the design, a double die, and every single coin struck from that die would carry that doubling permanently and indelibly into its surface. On the 1958 D double die obverse, the misalignment between the 2 hub impressions was significant enough to create a doubling that is visible without magnification on the finest known examples, and that degree of visibility, that dramatic boldness of the error, is precisely what elevates this coin above almost every other double die variety in the Lincoln Cent series and places it in a category of rarity and desirability that only a handful of American coins can claim to share. The story of how the finest known 1958 D double die was discovered and authenticated is itself the stuff of numismatic legend. For years, rumors circulated within the collector community that such a coin existed, that somewhere out there was a 1958 D wheat penny with a double die so bold and so dramatic that it represented perhaps the single most spectacular error in the entire 50-year history of the Wheat Cent series. Dealers talked about it, collectors searched for it, and the numismatic press occasionally ran speculative pieces about what such a coin might be worth if it ever surfaced and was properly authenticated. And then it did surface, and the reaction from the numismatic community was everything the rumors had promised and more. When the coin was submitted to the professional coin grading service and the experts there had their first opportunity to examine it carefully, the response was one of those rare moments in the hobby when even the most experienced, most jaded professionals are visibly moved by what they are seeing. The doubling was real, it was dramatic, it was unmistakable, and the coin's condition, its state of preservation across the decades since it left the Denver Mint, was extraordinary. Here was a coin that had somehow survived from 1958 in a state of preservation that defied all probability, carrying one of the most significant minting errors in American numismatic history, and the collector community's response to its authentication was immediate, intense, and financially spectacular. The auction that followed set records and generated a level of excitement and competitive bidding that reminded everyone present of why they had fallen in love with numismatics in the first place. But the financial story of the 1958 Wheat Penny doubled die does not exist in isolation, it exists within the broader context of what makes the final year of the Wheat Pennies series so emotionally and historically resonant for collectors. Think about what 1958 meant in American life. The space age was dawning, Sputnik had already been launched the previous year and the shock of it was still reverberating through American society. Elvis Presley was transforming popular music, and a new generation of Americans was beginning to emerge who would eventually reshape everything about the country they had inherited. The coins struck in 1958 were handled by people who were living through one of the most dynamic and transformative periods in 20th century American history, and those coins absorbed all of that context, all of that energy, all of that historical moment into their very existence. A 1958 Wheat penny in extraordinary condition is not just a coin, it is a physical artifact of a specific and irreplaceable moment in time. And when you add to that the presence of a minting error so dramatic and so rare that only a handful of confirmed examples exist in the entire world, you have created something whose value cannot be measured purely in financial terms, though the financial terms are themselves extraordinary enough to command attention. The condition grading dimension of the 1958 double die story is particularly compelling because the population of high-grade examples with confirmed doubling is so vanishingly small that even a single new discovery of a well-preserved example would be a major numismatic event. PCGS and NGC population reports for the finest known examples of this variety show numbers so low that they can be counted on the fingers of one hand, and in the world of rare coin collecting, scarcity at the very top of the condition scale is the single most powerful driver of value. A coin that exists in only one or two examples at the highest grade level is not just rare, it is essentially unique, and unique objects in the possession of passionate, wealthy collectors tend to command prices that exist outside the normal framework of market logic entirely. Now consider the collector's psychology that surrounds a coin like this. There is a phenomenon in numismatics that dealers sometimes call the last chance effect, the tendency of collectors to pursue aggressively and pay premiums for coins that represent the final examples of a particular series or design type. The 1958 Wheat penny is not just a rare error coin, it is a rare error coin from the very last year of one of America's most beloved and longest-running coin series. And that combination of terminal rarity and error rarity creates a desirability that is essentially impossible to overstate. Collectors who specialize in Lincoln cents know that completing a high-grade set with a confirmed doubled die example from the final year of the Wheat series is the kind of achievement that defines a collection, the kind of piece that makes everything else in the cabinet look like supporting cast rather than the main event. We want to leave you today with something more than just numbers and auction records and grading population statistics, because the true magic of a coin like the 1958 Wheat penny is not ultimately about money, it is about the extraordinary improbability of its existence and its survival. Somewhere in 1958, a press operator at the Denver Mint loaded a die that had been improperly hubbed, a die carrying that bold and dramatic doubled impression, and that press struck coins, perhaps dozens of them, perhaps more, before anyone noticed the error or the die was pulled from service. Those coins entered circulation and began their journey through American life, passing from hand to hand, register to register, piggy bank to piggy bank, and the overwhelming majority of them were spent, worn, melted, lost, or simply discarded without anyone ever understanding what they were. But a tiny few survived, preserved by chance or by the instinct of some long-forgotten collector who looked at that coin and sensed that something about it was different without being able to articulate exactly what. Those survivors are now among the most sought-after objects in the entire world of American numismatics, and if by some extraordinary stroke of fortune one of them is sitting right now in a jar on your shelf or in a box in your attic or in a collection you inherited from someone who is no longer here to explain what they were saving and why, then you are holding something that transcends its face value by a margin so enormous that no ordinary words can adequately capture it. So check your coins, check them carefully, check them with patience and with hope, because history has proven over and over again that fortune sometimes hides in the most ordinary places, waiting for the one person who is paying close enough attention to find it. Thank you for staying with us through every extraordinary story in today's video, from the 1945 Wheat Pennies' $45 million legacy, through the 1951 Wheat Pennies' $41 million mystery, and finally to this breathtaking 1958 D Wheat Penny and its $40 million grand finale. And remember, the next time you reach into your pocket and feel the familiar weight of a penny, take one more look before you spend it, because on this channel, we have shown you today that the most ordinary things in the world sometimes carry the most extraordinary secrets.